Elena Martinez had been fixing broken things for as long as anyone in Clearwater, Montana could remember. But what they didn't know was that the most broken thing she'd ever repaired was herself. On a Tuesday morning that would change everything. She stood in her converted hangar watching storm clouds gather over Glacier National Park, unaware that in 3 hours she would be pulling off the most impossible landing in aviation history. The F-16 Fighting Falcon, hidden behind false walls, would scream to life for the first time in 8 years, and the quiet woman who everyone called just the mechanic would remind the world why some legends never truly die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like every other morning in Clearwater. Had for the past 8 years. Elena Martinez arrived at her hangar before dawn, her boots crunching on gravel that never seemed to stay where she swept it. The converted aircraft maintenance facility sat at the edge of what used to be Clearwater Municipal Airport, a relic from World War II when young pilots trained in these Montana skies before shipping off to fight overseas. Now it was just Elena, her tools, and the endless parade of vintage aircraft that wealthy collectors brought her to restore. At 35, Elena carried herself with an economy of movement that suggested every action had been practiced until it became muscle memory. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coveralls bore the kind of oil stains that spoke of years spent elbow-deep in aircraft engines. She had the lean build of someone who climbed in and out of cockpits regularly, though anyone who asked would be told she was just thorough about her inspections. Her hands moved over aircraft controls and components with a familiarity that went beyond mere mechanical knowledge, touching surfaces like she was greeting old friends. The people of Clearwater had accepted Elena as one of their own without asking too many questions about where she'd come from, or why a woman with her obvious expertise had chosen to settle in a town of 1,200 people. Sheriff Tom Bradley occasionally wondered why she always seemed to know exactly when military aircraft were flying overhead before anyone else heard them. And Betty Walsh at the diner had noticed how Elena unconsciously straightened to attention whenever the flag was raised at the elementary school. Frank Morrison from the hardware store swore she could identify aircraft by engine sound alone, even when they were too high to see. But Elena deflected curiosity with the practiced ease of someone who'd been guarding secrets for years. When asked about her background, she'd mention her grandfather who'd taught her about aircraft, show them the faded photographs of him in his Army Air Corps uniform, and redirect conversations toward the planes she was working on. She maintained an invisible boundary around her personal history that was firm but never rude, professional but never cold. The townspeople respected her privacy the way small communities do when someone contributes without causing trouble. What they didn't know was that Elena's real expertise lay not in restoring vintage aircraft, but in flying the most advanced fighter jets the United States military had ever produced. Behind the public section of her hangar, concealed by a false wall that appeared to be storage for aircraft parts, sat an F-16 Fighting Falcon that officially didn't exist. The aircraft had been salvaged through channels that skirted the edge of legality, its military markings replaced with civilian registration numbers that would pass casual inspection. Elena had spent 5 years rebuilding the fighter from components acquired through a network of contacts who understood that some aircraft deserved to fly again, regardless of bureaucracy. Every evening after closing her public shop, Elena would slip through the hidden entrance and spend hours maintaining the F-16 systems. She ran diagnostics on avionics that could track multiple targets simultaneously, tested weapon systems that had been deactivated but could be restored, and ensured that every component remained in perfect working order. The aircraft's fuel tank stayed topped off, its ejection seat was regularly inspected, and its engines were turned over weekly to prevent degradation. Anyone hearing the sound assumed Elena was testing engines for the vintage aircraft she restored. publicly. On Sunday evenings, when the town settled into its weekend quiet and tourist traffic thinned to nothing, Elena would sit in the F-16's cockpit and remember who she used to be. Her hands would rest on controls that had once guided her through combat missions over hostile territory. And for those precious moments, she wasn't Elena Martinez, the aircraft mechanic. She was Phoenix, the fighter pilot who'd never lost a wingman and never failed to complete a mission. In those moments, the careful identity she'd constructed would slip away, revealing someone who'd once been among the most skilled pilots in the United States Air Force. Elena had been the youngest member of the 455th Fighter Squadron, an elite unit known as the Sky Hunters that specialized in missions other squadrons couldn't handle. They flew in situations where precision mattered more than firepower, where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and international incidents. Elena's call sign Phoenix came from her ability to pull victory from situations that looked hopeless, to find solutions when all conventional options had been exhausted. Her squadron leader, Captain Derek Sullivan, had once said she could land a fighter jet on a postage stamp if the mission required it. The Sky Hunters had been disbanded 8 years ago following an incident that officially never happened. Elena and her wingman, Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez, had been flying escort for a classified extraction mission when they'd been engaged by enemy fighters. In the chaos of aerial combat, friendly fire from their own forces had nearly brought down Rodriguez's aircraft. Elena had managed to guide his damaged F-16 to a safe landing, but the mission's failures led to a congressional investigation that someone needed to contain. The 455th Fighter Squadron was officially disbanded, its members scattered to different assignments or quietly encouraged to separate from the service. Elena had chosen separation, unable to trust a system that would sacrifice good pilots to protect political careers. She disappeared into civilian life, using her grandfather's surname and settling in a place where aviation was appreciated, but not scrutinized. For 8 years, she'd lived quietly, fixing aircraft and helping the occasional lost tourist find their way to Glacier National Park. She'd convinced herself that Phoenix was dead, that Elena Martinez was her true identity now. On this particular Tuesday morning, storm clouds were building over the Continental Divide with unusual intensity. Elena stood outside her hangar watching the weather develop, her trained eye reading atmospheric conditions like a meteorologist. Wind patterns, cloud formations, and barometric pressure changes told her this would be more than a typical mountain storm. The system moving in carried the kind of turbulence and visibility challenges that grounded most aircraft and challenged even experienced pilots. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside her public workshop, Elena was rebuilding the engine on a 1943 P-51 Mustang when she heard vehicles approaching. The sound was wrong for Clearwater's usual traffic: too many engines, too much coordination, and the distinctive rumble of government-issued vehicles. Elena's hands paused on the Mustang's propeller as 3 black SUVs turned into her gravel driveway, moving with the kind of precision that made her blood run cold. The vehicle stopped in formation outside her hangar, and Elena counted 6 people, stepping out in synchronized movements. 5 were clearly security personnel, wearing the kind of nondescript dark clothing that screamed federal agent. The 6th was a woman in her 40s wearing an Air Force officer's uniform, her bearing suggesting someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Elena recognized the type immediately: intelligence specialist, probably with clearance. Levels that most generals never saw. Elena wiped her hands on a shop rag and walked toward the group, maintaining the curious but helpful demeanor of a small-town business owner receiving unexpected visitors. The officer stepped forward with a confidence that suggested she knew exactly who she was dealing with, despite Elena's carefully constructed civilian identity. "Elena Martinez," the officer said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm Agent Lisa Chun, Air Force Intelligence. We need to discuss a situation that requires your particular expertise." Elena kept her expression neutral, falling back on 8 years of practiced responses. "I restore vintage aircraft and do some repair work for local pilots. If you're looking for military contractors, you might want to try Malmstrom Air Force Base. They're about 3 hours southeast." Agent Chun smiled with the patience of someone who'd expected exactly that response. "Ms. Martinez, we're not here about vintage aircraft restoration. We're here because 47 minutes ago, an F-16 Fighting Falcon developed multiple system failures during a training mission over Glacier National Park. The pilot managed to eject, but the aircraft is still airborne under autopilot, carrying a full fuel load and classified avionics packages." Elena felt her pulse quicken, but kept her voice steady. "That sounds like a job for Air Force search and rescue. I'm not sure how I can help with a military situation. The aircraft is flying in a deteriorating weather system with zero visibility and severe turbulence," Chun continued. "It's currently on a flight path that will take it directly over populated areas before it runs out of fuel and crashes. We've tried remote shutdown procedures, but the damage has affected our ability to control the aircraft remotely." Elena glanced toward the storm clouds building over the mountains, her mind automatically calculating wind speeds, ceiling heights, and visibility conditions. The weather was indeed deteriorating rapidly, creating exactly the kind of flying conditions that would ground most rescue operations. "Surely you have pilots who can handle this situation." Agent Chun's expression became more serious. "We've consulted with every available pilot in the region. The weather conditions combined with the aircraft's unpredictable flight characteristics due to damage make this mission extremely dangerous. 3 pilots have already declined to attempt interception." She paused, studying Elena's face carefully. "We need someone with exceptional skill, someone who's flown in impossible conditions before and succeeded. I run an aircraft restoration business," Elena said, but even as she spoke, she knew her cover was dissolving. "I haven't flown military aircraft in years." Chun reached into her jacket and pulled out a tablet, swiping to display a series of photographs. The images showed Elena's hangar from above, taken by high-resolution satellite cameras. In the photos, heat signatures clearly showed 2 aircraft, the vintage planes in her public workshop, and another aircraft hidden behind what appeared to be storage areas. The heat signature of the concealed aircraft matched the profile of an profile. F-16 Fighting Falcon. "Our satellites detected unusual heat signatures from your facility during routine monitoring of civilian airfields," Chun explained. "The thermal profile suggests you've been maintaining a military-grade fighter aircraft in operational condition. That level of maintenance requires someone with intimate knowledge of F-16 systems." Elena stared at the satellite images, realizing that her carefully hidden secret had been discovered by the same technology she'd once used to identify targets overseas. Those images could show anything. Old engines generate heat signatures. Chun swiped to another image, this one showing Elena herself walking toward the concealed section of her hangar. The timestamp indicated the photo had been taken just 3 days earlier. "We've been monitoring this location for 2 weeks, Ms. Martinez. We know about your evening maintenance routines, your weekly engine tests, and your Sunday evening flights in restricted airspace." The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd thought she was invisible, living quietly below everyone's radar. Instead, she'd been under surveillance, her every move cataloged and analyzed by the same intelligence apparatus she'd once served. Monitoring civilian facilities requires warrants. Not when those facilities are suspected of housing undocumented military assets, Chun replied. But we're not here to arrest you or confiscate your aircraft. We're here because we need Phoenix. The use of her old call sign felt like hearing her real name spoken after years of aliases. Elena's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment, long enough for Chun to notice. "I don't know what you're talking about." Agent Chun activated another file on her tablet, displaying military service records that were supposed to be classified beyond retrieval. Elena's photograph appeared alongside her service history. 455th Fighter Squadron, call sign Phoenix, distinguished service record including 17 successful combat missions and 0 aircraft losses. Captain Elena Rodriguez, formerly of the Sky Hunters. After separation from service, you legally changed your name to Elena Martinez and disappeared into civilian life. Elena realized that arguing further would be pointless. Her hidden identity had been thoroughly compromised, her secret aircraft discovered, and her past dragged back into the light. "What do you want?" "The damaged F-16 is carrying classified avionics that cannot be allowed to fall into civilian hands or be destroyed in a crash," Chun explained. "We need someone to intercept the aircraft, assess its condition, and either guide it to a controlled landing or ensure its destruction in an unpopulated area. The weather conditions and aircraft instability make this mission extremely dangerous." Elena looked toward the mountains where the storm was intensifying. Flying in those conditions would be challenging for any pilot, but attempting to intercept and assess a damaged aircraft added layers of complexity that few people could handle. "You have other pilots with F-16 experience." "We have pilots with experience," Chun agreed. "But we don't have pilots with your specific skill set. Your service record shows successful missions in conditions that grounded other squadrons. You've flown damaged aircraft to safety, navigated severe weather systems, and completed objectives that other pilots considered impossible." Elena walked to the window of her workshop, staring at the P-51 Mustang she'd been working on. The vintage fighter represented everything she loved about aviation: the purity of flight, the craftsmanship of engineering, the romance of an era when flying was as much art as science. Her hidden F-16 represented something else entirely: the precision of modern warfare, the responsibility of protecting others, and the weight of decisions that affected more than just her own survival. "If I were to hypothetically help with this situation," Elena said carefully, "what would be the parameters of the mission?" Chun activated a tactical display on her tablet, showing the current position and projected flight path of the damaged aircraft. "The F-16 is currently flying at 22,000 feet, approximately 30 miles northwest of your position. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, with cloud ceiling dropping to 8,000 feet and visibility decreasing to less than 2 miles. Wind speeds are gusting to 40 knots with severe turbulence reported." Elena studied the tactical information, her mind automatically processing the challenges involved. Intercepting an aircraft in those conditions would require precise navigation and exceptional flying skills. Assessing the damage while maintaining formation in severe turbulence would push the limits of both pilot and aircraft. "What's the aircraft's current condition?" "Unknown," Chun admitted. The pilot reported multiple system failures before ejecting, including primary flight controls and navigation systems. The aircraft is currently flying on backup systems under autopilot, but we don't know how long those systems will remain functional. Elena continued studying the tactical display, noting wind patterns and weather projections. The storm system was moving faster than typical for the region, creating a narrow window of opportunity before conditions became impossible for any aircraft operation. "What's the timeline?" "Based on current fuel consumption and flight path, you'd have approximately 90 minutes to locate, intercept, and assess the aircraft before it either crashes or reaches populated areas," Chun explained. "Weather conditions will continue deteriorating throughout that time frame." Elena realized she was being presented with exactly the kind of mission Phoenix had been designed for: high stakes, Impossible conditions and no room for error. Part of her felt the familiar thrill of challenge, the anticipation of pushing aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. Another part of her remembered why she'd walked away from this life, the weight of responsibility that came with missions where failure meant civilian casualties. "If I help with this situation," Elena said, "I want guarantees about what happens afterward. My aircraft, my identity, my life here in Clearwater." Agent Chun nodded as if she'd expected this request. "Your cooperation in this matter would be considered a civilian contract with appropriate compensation. Your aircraft would remain registered under current civilian classifications, and your privacy would be protected under national security provisions." Elena looked around her workshop, taking in the familiar tools and projects that had defined her life for 8 years. The P-51 Mustang sat partially disassembled, representing the kind of straightforward mechanical challenge she'd grown comfortable with. Outside, the storm clouds continued building, and somewhere in those clouds, a damaged fighter aircraft was flying toward potential disaster. "I'll need 30 minutes to prepare," Elena said finally. "And I'll need your people to clear the area around my hangar. What I'm about to show you is going to require some explanation." Agent Chun smiled for the first time since arriving. "Phoenix, welcome back to active duty." As Elena walked toward the concealed section of her hangar, she felt the familiar transformation beginning. Elena Martinez, the quiet mechanic, was stepping aside, making room for someone who'd once been among the most skilled fighter pilots in the world. The storm outside was intensifying, and somewhere in those turbulent skies, a mission was waiting that would test every skill she'd spent 8 years trying to forget. The hidden hangar door slid open with a whisper of hydraulics, revealing the F-16 Fighting Falcon that had been Elena's secret for so many years. The aircraft sat in perfect condition, its gray and blue paint scheme gleaming under the hangar lights. Agent Chun's security team stepped back involuntarily, clearly not expecting to see a fully operational fighter jet in what they'd assumed was a simple aircraft restoration facility. Elena moved toward the F-16 with practiced efficiency, her hands already reaching for the flight suit that hung in a nearby locker. As she began her pre-flight preparations, she could feel Phoenix awakening after 8 years of dormancy. In 90 minutes, she would either save lives or die trying. But either way, the quiet mechanic from Clearwater, Montana, was about to remind everyone why legends never truly disappear. The sounds had started 3 years ago, and by now they were as much a part of Clearwater's daily rhythm as the morning whistle from the old lumber mill or the evening train that carried freight through the valley. Every Tuesday and Friday around sunset, a deep rumbling would echo from the direction of Elena's hangar, lasting exactly 12 minutes before fading to silence. The sound was distinctive enough that people had learned to pause their conversations and listen, trying to identify what kind of engine could produce such a powerful note. Betty Walsh had been the first to comment on it, standing behind the counter of her diner while wiping down coffee cups that didn't need cleaning. She'd mentioned to Frank Morrison that Elena must be testing some serious machinery back there, maybe rebuilding one of those old military training planes from the war. Frank had nodded thoughtfully, suggesting that Elena might be working on contract for one of those wealthy collectors who flew vintage aircraft at air shows. The sound was definitely military grade, he'd said, nothing like the smooth purr of civilian aircraft engines. Sheriff Tom Bradley had his own theory, developed during long evenings spent on his porch listening to the rumbling drift across town. The sound reminded him of jets he'd heard during his brief stint in the Army, back when he was stationed near an Air Force base in Nevada. But Elena only worked on propeller aircraft as far as anyone knew, so it had to be something else. Maybe she'd acquired one of those old jet trainers that were sometimes sold to civilian buyers, the kind that rich pilots bought to satisfy their need for speed and excitement. The teenagers in town had developed the most creative explanation, deciding that Elena was secretly building a rocket ship in her hangar. They'd started timing the engine tests with stopwatches, creating elaborate theories about fuel consumption and thrust calculations. Jamie Parker, who worked part-time at Elena's shop during summer breaks, had become the unofficial expert on Elena's mysterious project. The kids would gather around Jamie at the ice cream parlor, pressing for details about what Elena was really working on behind those closed hangar doors. Jamie always deflected their questions with the loyalty of someone who genuinely respected their employer. Elena had been good to him, teaching him about aircraft systems and paying him fairly for his work. If she wanted to keep some of her projects private, that was her business. But even Jamie had to admit he was curious about the section of the hangar he was never allowed to enter, the area Elena always referred to as storage for sensitive client projects. The rumbling always seemed to come from that direction, and sometimes Jamie noticed that Elena would disappear for hours at a time, claiming she was doing detailed inspection work that required absolute concentration. The sound itself was unlike anything most of Clearwater's residents had ever heard. It started low and built to a crescendo that seemed to shake the air itself, creating a vibration that could be felt as much as heard. Windows would rattle slightly in their frames, and dogs throughout the neighborhood would prick their ears and look toward the old airport with expressions of alert confusion. The rumble carried a note of barely contained power, suggesting machinery designed for purposes far beyond simple transportation. Elena had become skilled at timing these engine tests to coincide with other town activities. Friday evening tests happened during the high school football games, when most of the population was gathered at the stadium cheering for the Clearwater Eagles. Tuesday tests occurred during the volunteer fire department's weekly training sessions, when the sound of their own equipment provided cover for Elena's activities. She'd learned to read the town's schedule like a tactical manual, finding windows of opportunity when fewer people would notice or question unusual sounds. The timing wasn't accidental. Elena had studied sound propagation patterns around her hangar, understanding how wind direction and atmospheric conditions affected how far engine noise would travel. She'd also learned which residents were likely to investigate unusual sounds, and which were content to develop theories from a distance. Mrs. Henderson from the post office was a listener who might call Sheriff Bradley if something seemed truly out of place. Frank Morrison was curious but respectful of boundaries. Betty Walsh was observant, but more interested in gathering gossip than taking action. What the townspeople couldn't know was that the sounds they heard represented only a fraction of Elena's actual engine testing routine. The 12-minute sessions were carefully calculated to warm the F-16's engines without triggering automatic military monitoring systems that tracked jet aircraft signatures. Elena had learned through research that most surveillance algorithms were programmed to ignore engine signatures lasting less than 15 minutes, categorizing them as maintenance activities rather than actual flight preparation. The real flight tests happened during severe weather events, when atmospheric conditions would mask engine signatures and when civilian air traffic was grounded. Elena would wait for storms like the one currently building over Glacier National Park, using thunder and wind to cover the sound of an F-16 reaching full operational status. She developed a network of weather monitoring equipment that gave her precise data about atmospheric conditions, allowing her to predict when natural phenomena would provide perfect cover for her activities. During these weather mask sessions, Elena would run complete system checks on the F-16, testing everything from basic engine function to advanced avionics packages. She'd simulate combat scenarios using the aircraft's training modes, maintaining her proficiency with systems she hadn't used in active combat for 8 years. These sessions were Elena's way of staying connected to her former identity, ensuring that Phoenix's skills remained sharp even while Elena Martinez lived quietly in Montana. The maintenance schedule Elena followed was more rigorous than what most active military units demanded. Every component was inspected monthly, every system tested weekly, and every critical function verified daily. Elena treated the hidden F-16 like a living thing that required constant attention to remain healthy and ready. She'd rebuilt the engines twice during her 8 years in Clearwater, upgrading them with improvements that pushed performance beyond original military specifications. The aircraft itself represented the culmination of decades of aerospace engineering and Elena's personal modifications. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was originally designed as a lightweight, highly maneuverable fighter, capable of both air-to-air combat and precision ground attack missions. Elena's version had been stripped of weapon systems but retained all the sophisticated electronics and flight control systems that made the F-16 one of the world's most capable fighter aircraft. She'd added civilian navigation equipment and communication systems, creating a hybrid that could operate in both military and civilian airspace without detection. Hidden throughout the hangar were the tools and equipment necessary to maintain a modern fighter jet. Diagnostic computers capable of interfacing with the F-16's flight control systems, spare parts for components that weren't available through civilian channels, and specialized tools designed for working on military aircraft systems. Elena had acquired this equipment gradually over 8 years, using contacts from her military service and relationships built through her civilian aircraft restoration business. The most challenging aspect of maintaining her secret had been fuel procurement. Jet fuel required for the F-16's engines wasn't something that could be ordered through normal civilian aviation channels without raising questions. Elena had solved this problem by establishing relationships with private airfield operators who served wealthy clients with business jets. She'd become known as someone who could help with unusual fuel requirements for vintage military aircraft used in airshows, creating a legitimate cover story for purchasing military-grade aviation fuel in quantities that would support her hidden activities. Elena's workshop area was a masterpiece of concealment and functionality. The public section contained all the tools and projects that visitors would expect to see in an aircraft restoration facility. Vintage engines in various stages of rebuild, propellers awaiting refinishing, fabric and metal components for classic aircraft restoration projects. The work was legitimate and high quality, establishing Elena's reputation as someone whose expertise extended far beyond basic mechanical skills. Behind the false wall that concealed her F-16, Elena had created a complete aircraft maintenance facility equipped with everything necessary to support a modern fighter jet. Hydraulic lifts capable of raising the aircraft for undercarriage maintenance. Computer diagnostic systems connected to the F-16's internal monitoring networks, and climate control systems that maintained optimal temperature and humidity for sensitive electronic components. The facility rivaled some military maintenance operations in terms of capability and organization. The false wall itself was an engineering achievement that had taken Elena 6 months to perfect. From the public side, it appeared to be a storage area filled with aircraft parts, old engines, and restoration supplies. The shelving units were functional and contained genuine aircraft components, but they were mounted on hidden tracks that allowed entire sections to slide aside when Elena activated concealed controls. The system was designed to operate silently and could be opened or closed in less than 30 seconds. Elena had also installed sophisticated security systems throughout the hidden area, including motion detectors, thermal sensors, and communication jamming equipment that would prevent unauthorized electronic surveillance. The systems were military grade but appeared to be civilian security equipment to anyone who might discover them. Elena could monitor the entire facility remotely through encrypted communication links, ensuring she would know immediately if anyone attempted to breach. Her concealment. The most personal area of Elena's hidden facility was a small office space where she kept mementos from her military service. Photographs of her squadron mates from the Sky Hunters, mission reports from successful operations, and commendation letters that documented her achievements as Phoenix. This space served as Elena's private sanctuary, a place where she could remember who she'd been before choosing exile in civilian life. Among these mementos was a photograph taken during her final mission as Phoenix, showing her standing next to her F-16 with Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez and the rest of their flight crew. The photo had been taken just hours before the friendly fire incident that would end the Sky Hunters and force Elena into hiding. Looking at the image always brought back memories of the trust and camaraderie she'd shared with her squadron, feelings that civilian life had never quite replaced. Elena's daily routine had evolved to support both her public identity and her hidden activities. She would arrive at the hangar before dawn, spending the first hour of each day checking systems, at the hangar before dawn, the concealed F-16 before opening her public workshop. These morning inspections ensured that her aircraft remained in constant readiness while appearing to be normal preparation for a day of restoration work. She developed the ability to transition seamlessly between her two identities, shifting from Phoenix checking fighter aircraft systems to Elena Martinez, preparing for another day of vintage aircraft restoration. The transition between identities had become so natural that Elena sometimes forgot which version of herself she was supposed to be. When examining aircraft engines, her hands would automatically check for signs of combat damage or stress fractures that indicated high-performance flight operations. When talking to clients about restoration projects, she would occasionally reference flight characteristics and performance specifications that suggested knowledge far beyond normal civilian aviation experience. Elena's expertise in aircraft systems had made her invaluable to the small community of aviation enthusiasts in the region. Pilots would bring their aircraft to her shop, not just for maintenance but for consultation about performance problems and modification possibilities. Elena's diagnostic abilities were legendary among local aviators, who often said she could identify aircraft problems by listening to engine sounds that other mechanics couldn't even detect. This reputation had created a steady stream of challenging projects that kept Elena's skills sharp while providing cover for her more secretive activities. Rebuilding vintage military trainers required many of the same skills needed to maintain her hidden F-16, and working on civilian jets provided opportunities to acquire parts and equipment that could be adapted for her fighter aircraft. Elena had learned to see every restoration project as potential training for maintaining her own aircraft. The most difficult aspect of her double life was the isolation it required. Elena couldn't form close relationships with anyone in Clearwater because true intimacy would eventually lead to questions she couldn't answer honestly. She'd learned to be friendly but not too friendly, helpful but not too involved in other people's personal lives. This careful balance had allowed her to become a respected member of the community while maintaining the emotional distance necessary to protect her secrets. Elena's relationship with Jamie Parker represented the closest thing to genuine friendship she'd allowed herself in 8 years. The young man's enthusiasm for aviation reminded Elena of her own early fascination with flight, and his respectful curiosity about her work created opportunities for Elena to share knowledge without revealing dangerous truths. Teaching Jamie about aircraft systems provided Elena with a connection to the passion that had originally drawn her to aviation, before military service and political betrayal had complicated her relationship with flying. The evening maintenance sessions Elena conducted on her F-16 had become a form of meditation, a time when she could connect with the aircraft and with her own identity as Phoenix. During these hours, Elena would run her hands over every surface of the fighter, checking for signs of wear or damage that might affect performance. She would sit in the cockpit and run through mental flight scenarios, keeping her tactical awareness sharp through visualization and system familiarization. These sessions also served a practical purpose, ensuring that Elena remained current with the F-16's constantly evolving systems. Modern fighter aircraft relied heavily on computer-controlled flight systems that required regular updates and maintenance. Elena had established covert connections with active duty personnel who could provide her with software updates and technical bulletins, ensuring that her aircraft remained compatible with current military systems and procedures. The F-16 itself had become more than just an aircraft to Elena. It represented her connection to a version of herself that she valued, but could no longer publicly claim. Phoenix had been confident, decisive, and respected by peers who understood the demands of military aviation. Elena Martinez was competent and reliable, but she lacked the sense of purpose and identity that had defined Phoenix's existence. The hidden fighter jet served as a bridge between these two identities, allowing Elena to maintain some connection to her true self while living. In exile, Elena had modified the F-16's paint scheme to reflect her civilian status, while maintaining elements that honored her military service. The aircraft wore a gray and blue color pattern that could pass for civilian demonstration aircraft at air shows. But closer inspection would reveal subtle details that indicated its true heritage. The squadron insignia of the Sky Hunters was still visible on the aircraft's tail, painted small enough to avoid casual notice, but large enough to remind Elena of her true identity. The most significant modification Elena had made to her F-16 was the installation of advanced navigation and communication equipment that allowed the aircraft to operate safely in civilian airspace. Military fighters were designed to operate with support from air traffic control systems and radar networks that tracked friendly aircraft, but civilian operations required self-contained navigation capabilities. Elena had equipped her aircraft with GPS systems, civilian transponders, and communication radios that allowed her to coordinate with civilian air traffic controllers when necessary. Elena's knowledge of aviation regulations had allowed her to create documentation for her F-16 that would satisfy most official inquiries without revealing the aircraft's true military heritage. The paperwork identified the aircraft as an experimental demonstration plane used for airshow exhibitions, a classification that explained its high-performance capabilities while justifying its presence at a civilian facility. Elena had even created false maintenance records and inspection reports that would satisfy regulatory agencies if they ever conducted detailed investigations. The weather monitoring equipment Elena had installed throughout her facility provided her with detailed information about atmospheric conditions that affected both her public restoration work and her private flight activities. She could predict wind patterns, visibility conditions, and storm systems with accuracy that often exceeded official weather services. This capability had made Elena valuable to local pilots who relied on her weather assessments for flight planning, while providing her with the information necessary to schedule her own covert activities. Elena's understanding of weather patterns had also helped her identify the optimal times for conducting engine tests and system checks on her F-16. She'd learned that atmospheric conditions during certain weather events would mask the acoustic signature of jet engines, allowing her to run full power tests without alerting military monitoring systems. These natural camouflage opportunities were rare, but provided Elena with windows of opportunity to maintain her aircraft at full operational readiness. The storage areas of Elena's facility contained enough spare parts and supplies to maintain her F-16 independently for several years. Elena had gradually accumulated components for every major system of the aircraft, from engine parts to avionics modules to structural components. This stockpile represented years of careful acquisition through military surplus channels, civilian aerospace suppliers, and connections within the aviation community who could provide specialized components without asking difficult questions. Elena's tool collection represented another significant investment in maintaining her aircraft's operational status. Military aircraft required specialized tools and equipment that weren't available through civilian channels, forcing Elena to acquire these items gradually through surplus sales and connections with active duty personnel. She'd assembled a complete maintenance capability that rivaled some military depot facilities, ensuring that she could perform any necessary repairs or modifications without external support. The communication equipment Elena had installed in her facility allowed her to monitor military and civilian aviation frequencies throughout the region. She could track aircraft movements, listen to air traffic control communications, and stay informed about aviation activities that might affect her own operations. This monitoring capability also provided Elena with early warning about any unusual military activities that might indicate increased surveillance of civilian aviation facilities. Elena's facility included a comprehensive library of technical manuals, maintenance procedures, and regulatory documents related to both military and civilian aviation. She'd maintained subscriptions to professional publications and technical updates that kept her informed about developments in aerospace technology and military aviation procedures. This information helped Elena stay current with changes in aircraft systems and operational procedures that might affect her ability to maintain her F-16. The most carefully guarded secret within Elena's facility was a complete set of mission planning materials and tactical references from her service with the Sky Hunters. These documents contained classified information about combat tactics, mission procedures, and operational techniques that Elena had acquired during her military service. She'd preserved these materials partly for sentimental reasons and partly because they contained information that might be valuable if she ever needed to return to active duty. Elena's evening routine always concluded with a final inspection of her concealment systems, ensuring that all evidence of her F-16's presence was hidden from potential observers. She would verify that the false walls were properly positioned, that no unusual heat signatures were visible from outside the facility, and that all electronic systems were operating in passive monitoring mode. These precautions had kept Elena's secret safe for 8 years, creating the appearance of a normal aircraft restoration facility while concealing one of the most advanced fighter jets ever built. As Elena prepared for what might be her final evening as a hidden civilian, she reflected on the complexity of the life she'd built in Clearwater. The careful balance between Elena Martinez and Phoenix had required constant vigilance and meticulous attention to detail, but it had also provided her with a sense of stability and purpose that military life had never offered. The thought of abandoning this carefully constructed existence felt like losing a part of herself that had taken years to develop and refine. Sunday evenings in Clearwater carried a particular quality of silence that Elena had grown to treasure over her 8 years in Montana. The town would settle into its weekend rhythm as families gathered for dinner, children finished homework assignments, and the working week's tensions dissolved into the comfortable routines of small-town life. It was during these quiet hours, when tourist traffic had diminished and local residents were occupied with their own concerns, that Elena would perform her most sacred ritual. At precisely 6:30 each Sunday evening, after the last customer had departed and the hangar's public areas had been secured for the night, Elena would make her way to the concealed entrance of her hidden facility. The transition from Elena Martinez to Phoenix didn't happen instantaneously. It was a gradual transformation that began with the simple act of placing her hand on the biometric scanner that controlled access to her most carefully guarded secret. The scanner would read her palm print and retinal pattern, confirming her identity before the hidden door whispered open on silent hydraulics. The first thing Elena always noticed upon entering the concealed hangar was the change in atmosphere. The public areas of her facility carried the familiar sense of oil, metal, and wood stain associated with aircraft restoration work. The hidden area smelled different, the sharp ozone scent of advanced electronics, the metallic tang of precision-machined components, and the subtle chemical odors of military-grade lubricants and hydraulic fluids. These scents triggered memories that Elena had spent years trying to compartmentalize, bringing back images of squadron briefings, pre-dawn mission preparations, and the intense camaraderie of pilots who trusted each other with their lives. Elena's Sunday evening ritual always began with a complete external inspection of her F-16, a process that took nearly an hour to complete properly. She would start at the aircraft's nose, running her hands along surfaces that most people would never be permitted to touch, feeling for stress fractures, corrosion, or any sign of deterioration that might compromise the aircraft's structural integrity. Her fingers moved with the practiced expertise of someone who understood that a single overlooked flaw could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The external inspection was both a practical necessity and a form of meditation that allowed Elena to reconnect with the aircraft that represented her true identity. As her hands traced the F-16's aerodynamic contours, she would remember specific missions where this same attention to detail had saved lives. She recalled emergency landings where split-second decisions about aircraft condition had determined whether she and her wingmen would return home safely. These memories weren't always comfortable, but they served as reminders of why precision and thoroughness mattered in aviation. Elena's inspection routine covered every external component of the F-16, from the intake ducts that fed air to the powerful turbofan engine, to the control surfaces that provided the aircraft's legendary maneuverability. She would check tire pressure using a gauge calibrated specifically for fighter aircraft, examine hydraulic lines for signs of leakage, and verify that all external panels were properly secured. The process required her to climb onto the aircraft, using maintenance platforms, bringing her into physical contact with every accessible surface. The most emotionally significant part of Elena's external inspection involved the aircraft's tail section, where the faded insignia of the 455th Fighter Squadron remained barely visible beneath layers of civilian paint. Elena had never been able to completely cover the Skyhunter's emblem, partly because of its sentimental value and partly because removing it entirely would have felt like erasing the last evidence of her military service. Instead, she'd painted over it with colors that made the insignia difficult to see unless someone knew exactly where to look. Each Sunday evening, Elena would trace the outline of the Skyhunter's emblem with her finger, remembering the pride she'd felt when earning the right to wear that insignia on her flight suit. The emblem depicted a stylized eagle with wings spread wide, clutching lightning bolts that represented the squadron's reputation for striking quickly and decisively. Beneath the eagle, barely legible script spelled out the squadron's motto, "Death from Above." Elena had once embodied everything that motto represented, and touching the faded emblem helped her remember the confidence and sense of purpose that had defined her military service. After completing the external inspection, Elena would move to the F-16's cockpit for the most intimate part of her Sunday ritual. Climbing into the pilot's seat required her to duck under the aircraft's canopy and settle into an environment that had once been as familiar as her own bedroom. The cockpit of an F-16 was designed around the concept of putting the pilot in direct control of one of the world's most capable fighting machines, and every control, display, and switch was positioned for maximum efficiency during high-stress combat situations. Elena's hands would find the familiar positions on the flight controls without conscious thought, muscle memory guiding her fingers to switches and buttons that had once controlled life-or-death decisions. The control stick felt perfectly balanced in her right hand, its weight and responsiveness exactly as she remembered from hundreds of combat missions. Her left hand would rest on the throttle quadrant, feeling the subtle detents that marked different power settings from idle to full military power to afterburner engagement. The F-16's heads-up display would activate as Elena powered up the aircraft systems, projecting flight information onto a transparent screen positioned directly in her line of sight. The HUD was one of the innovations that made the F-16 such an effective fighter aircraft, allowing pilots to access critical flight data without looking down at instrument panels. Elena would watch the display come to life showing artificial horizon lines, airspeed indicators, and targeting information that had once guided her through aerial combat scenarios. During these cockpit sessions, Elena would run through mental exercises that kept her tactical awareness sharp despite years away from active duty. She would visualize combat scenarios, imagining how she would respond to different threats and challenges. These mental rehearsals weren't just nostalgia. They were practical training that ensured Elena could still think and react like a combat pilot if circumstances ever required her to return to that role. Elena's most profound moments during these Sunday sessions came when she would close her eyes and remember specific missions from her time with the Sky Hunters. She could recall the tension of pre-dawn briefings, where intelligence officers would outline objectives that seemed impossible until Phoenix and her squadron mates found ways to make them achievable. She remembered the trust that existed between squadron members, the unspoken understanding that each pilot would risk everything to protect their wingmen. The memories weren't all positive. Elena would also remember the mission that had ended everything, the friendly fire incident that had nearly killed Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez and had exposed the political corruption that ultimately destroyed the Sky Hunters. She could still see Rodriguez's F-16 trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid as she'd guided him to an emergency landing. Still hear his voice over the radio as he'd struggled to maintain control of a severely damaged aircraft. That mission had demonstrated both the best and worst aspects of military service. The courage and skill of individual pilots contrasted with the institutional failures that put good people at unnecessary risk. These Sunday evening sessions served multiple purposes in Elena's carefully structured life. They provided her with emotional connection to her authentic identity, while allowing her to maintain the technical skills that defined Phoenix's capabilities. The time spent in the F-16's cockpit kept Elena current with the aircraft's systems and procedures, ensuring that she could transition from civilian mechanic to combat pilot with minimal adjustment period if circumstances ever demanded such a transformation. Elena had also used these sessions to modify and improve her F-16's capabilities, making incremental changes that enhanced the aircraft's performance while maintaining its civilian registration status. She'd upgraded navigation systems, improved communication equipment, and made engine modifications that increased power output while reducing radar signature. These improvements represented Elena's ongoing commitment to maintaining her aircraft at the highest possible operational standard. The emotional impact of these Sunday rituals had evolved over Elena's 8 years in Clearwater. Initially, the sessions had been painful reminders of everything she'd lost when choosing exile over continued military service. The cockpit had felt like a tomb, filled with memories of a life that political betrayal had made impossible to continue. Over time, however, these sessions had become sources of strength, connecting Elena to the version of herself that she valued most highly. Elena's relationship with her hidden F-16 had become deeply personal, extending far beyond the practical considerations of aircraft maintenance. The fighter jet represented her connection to a time when her life had clear purpose and meaning, when her skills were valued by people who understood their significance. In civilian life, Elena's abilities were impressive but not essential. As Phoenix, those same abilities had saved lives and completed missions that protected national security interests. The transformation that occurred during these Sunday sessions was both psychological and physical. Elena's posture would change as she settled into the pilot's seat, her body assuming the alert, controlled stance that had once been her default state during military service. Her breathing would slow and deepen, matching the rhythm she'd learned during combat training. Her mental focus would sharpen, filtering out distractions and concentrating on the immediate environment in ways that civilian life rarely demanded. Elena had developed specific routines for different aspects of her Sunday sessions, creating a structured approach that maximized both the emotional and practical benefits of her time with the aircraft. She would begin with systems checks, methodically verifying that every component of the F-16 remained in perfect working order. These checks weren't just maintenance procedures. They were forms of meditation that allowed Elena to reconnect with the aircraft's complex systems while ensuring continued readiness. The systems checks would progress from basic functions like electrical power and hydraulics to more sophisticated systems like radar, navigation computers, and flight control software. Elena would verify that all systems responded correctly to inputs, that computer diagnostics showed no anomalies, and that the aircraft remained capable of full operational performance. These checks had revealed minor problems on several occasions, allowing Elena to address issues before they could compromise the aircraft's reliability. Elena's Sunday sessions also included flight planning exercises, where she would use current weather data and navigation charts to plot hypothetical missions throughout the region. These exercises kept Elena current with flight procedures and airspace regulations while providing mental stimulation that challenged her tactical thinking. She would consider different scenarios: emergency medical evacuations, search and rescue, operations, and even combat missions that might require her unique combination of civilian access and military capability. The most challenging aspect of Elena's Sunday rituals was managing the emotional intensity they generated. Spending time in the F-16's cockpit inevitably brought back memories of squadron mates who had died in service, missions that had pushed her to the limits of her abilities, and the sense of betrayal that had ultimately driven her from military service. Elena had learned to acknowledge these emotions without being overwhelmed by them, treating them as necessary components of maintaining her connection to Phoenix's identity. Elena's preparation for these sessions had become as ritualized as the sessions themselves. She would shower and change into civilian flight gear that resembled military flight suits, but lacked official insignia or markings. This clothing served both practical and psychological purposes, providing appropriate protection for working around aircraft systems while helping Elena transition mentally from her civilian identity to her authentic self as Phoenix. The lighting in Elena's hidden hangar had been carefully designed to support her Sunday evening rituals, with adjustable systems that could replicate different environmental conditions. Elena could simulate dawn missions, night operations, or the harsh lighting conditions found in desert combat zones. These lighting changes helped trigger specific memories and mental states, allowing Elena to practice psychological transitions that might be necessary if she ever needed to return to active duty. Elena had also installed a sophisticated sound system that could reproduce the ambient noise environments associated with military aviation. She could generate the sounds of aircraft carrier operations, busy military airfields, or the radio chatter typical of combat missions. These audio environments enhanced the realism of her mental training exercises while providing sensory cues that strengthened her connection to military aviation culture. The conclusion of each Sunday session followed a specific protocol that Elena had developed to ease her transition back to civilian life. She would spend 15 minutes reviewing civilian aviation news and technical publications, reminding herself of the legitimate aircraft restoration projects that provided cover for her hidden activities. This review helped Elena shift her mental focus from military operations back to the civilian concerns that defined Elena Martinez's daily existence. Elena's final act during each Sunday session was to secure the hidden hangar and verify that all evidence of her activities had been concealed. She would check that the F-16 systems were in standby mode, that the concealment mechanisms were properly positioned, and that no unusual heat signatures or electromagnetic emissions would be detectable by external monitoring equipment. These security checks had become second nature, but Elena never allowed herself to become careless about protecting her most important secret. The psychological impact of ending each Sunday session was always significant for Elena. Returning to her civilian identity after spending hours reconnected with Phoenix required deliberate mental effort and emotional discipline. Elena had learned to view these transitions as necessary exercises in identity management, practicing the skills she would need if circumstances ever forced her to maintain her cover while operating in high-stress situations. Elena's Sunday evening sessions had provided her with a stable framework for managing the complex demands of living a double life. They offered regular opportunities to maintain both her aircraft and her pilot skills while providing emotional connection to the identity she valued most highly. Without these sessions, Elena suspected that the psychological strain of concealing her true nature would have become unbearable over 8 years of civilian exile. The timing Elena had chosen for these sessions reflected her deep understanding of Clearwater's social rhythms and the practical requirements of maintaining her secret. Sunday evenings provided maximum privacy while minimizing the risk of unexpected visitors or unusual scrutiny from local residents. Elena had also verified that military surveillance systems were least active during these hours, reducing the likelihood that her activities would trigger automated monitoring alerts. Elena's Sunday rituals had evolved into more than just aircraft maintenance and pilot training. They had become essential components of her psychological health and identity preservation. These sessions allowed Elena to honor her authentic self, while maintaining the careful balance between Phoenix and Elena Martinez that had kept her safe for 8 years. As she prepared for what might be her final Sunday session before circumstances forced her back into active duty, Elena reflected on how these private moments had sustained her through the most challenging period of her life. The storm building over Glacier National Park would soon test whether Elena's 8 years of Sunday evening preparation had maintained the skills and mental readiness that defined Phoenix's capabilities. The damaged F-16 flying somewhere in those turbulent skies represented exactly the kind of challenge that Phoenix had been designed to handle, and Elena's Sunday sessions had ensured that she remained ready to meet that challenge despite years of civilian exile. Elena stood motionless in her hangar for nearly 10 minutes after Agent Chun's team had revealed their knowledge of her secret, staring at the F-16 Fighting Falcon that represented both her greatest achievement and her most carefully guarded vulnerability. The aircraft sat in perfect silence, its sleek gray and blue surfaces reflecting the harsh LED lighting that Elena had installed to facilitate night maintenance operations. Every line of the fighter jet spoke of precision engineering and deadly capability, a machine designed to push the boundaries of what was possible in aerial combat. The decision Elena faced wasn't really about whether to help with the crisis developing over Glacier National Park. The moment Agent Chun had mentioned a damaged F-16 threatening civilian populations, Elena's response had been predetermined by 8 years of Sunday evening sessions where she'd mentally rehearsed exactly this type of scenario. Phoenix had been trained never to abandon a mission when innocent lives were at stake, and that training remained embedded in Elena's psychological makeup despite her years of civilian exile. What troubled Elena wasn't the mission itself, but what accepting it would mean for the carefully constructed life she'd built in Clearwater. Elena Martinez would effectively cease to exist the moment she climbed into her F-16's cockpit, replaced by Phoenix in all the ways that mattered. The quiet mechanic who'd spent 8 years restoring vintage aircraft and helping tourists would be revealed as someone whose true capabilities extended far beyond civilian aviation, someone whose past included classified missions and political betrayals that most people couldn't comprehend. Elena walked slowly around her F-16, her hands trailing along surfaces she'd touched thousands of times during maintenance sessions and pre-flight inspections. The aircraft responded to her presence in ways that might have seemed mystical to outside observers, but reflected the deep familiarity that developed between experienced pilots and their machines. Systems activated automatically as Elena approached, internal computers recognizing her biometric signatures and preparing for potential flight operations. The transformation Elena was about to undergo went beyond simply changing clothes or adopting a different identity. Phoenix represented a fundamentally different way of thinking about problems and challenges, a mindset shaped by military training and combat experience that civilian life had never quite erased. Elena Martinez approached difficulties with patience and methodical analysis, taking time to consider multiple solutions before acting. Phoenix made rapid decisions based on incomplete information, trusting training and instinct to guide actions when hesitation could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Elena's flight gear hung in a climate-controlled locker adjacent to her F-16, maintained in perfect condition despite 8 years without official use. The flight suit was civilian in appearance, but incorporated features from military equipment that provided protection and functionality unavailable in standard aviation gear. Elena had modified the suit extensively, adding communication equipment, survival gear, and monitoring systems that would allow her to interface seamlessly with her aircraft's advanced systems. As Elena began changing into her flight gear, muscle memory guided actions she'd performed hundreds of times during her military service. Each component of the ensemble served specific purposes that went beyond simple protection or convenience. The flight suit's fabric incorporated materials that provided protection against fire and chemical exposure while maintaining flexibility necessary for aircraft operation. The integrated harness system would interface with her F-16's ejection seat, ensuring that emergency escape procedures would function correctly if circumstances required rapid aircraft abandonment. Elena's helmet represented the most sophisticated component of her flight equipment, incorporating technologies that most civilian pilots never encountered. The helmet's heads-up display could project flight information directly into Elena's field of vision, while integrated communication systems provided secure radio capability and noise cancellation features. Night vision equipment built into the helmet's visor would allow Elena to operate effectively in complete darkness, while threat warning systems could alert her to dangerous situations that might not be immediately apparent. The psychological transformation that accompanied Elena's preparation was as significant as the physical changes represented by her flight gear. As each piece of equipment clicked into place, Elena felt herself shifting from the cautious, methodical mindset of a civilian mechanic to the decisive, aggressive thinking patterns that had made Phoenix one of the military's most effective pilots. The change wasn't instantaneous, but it was profound, affecting everything from her posture to her breathing patterns to her mental approach to problem solving. Elena's pre-flight inspection of her F-16 followed procedures she'd memorized during military training but had adapted for her civilian operating environment. She moved around the aircraft with practiced efficiency, checking control surfaces, verifying fluid levels, and ensuring that all external components were properly secured. The inspection wasn't just about aircraft safety. It was a ritual that helped Elena complete her psychological transition from civilian mechanic to combat pilot. The F-16's cockpit welcomed Elena like a familiar embrace as she settled into the pilot's seat and began activating the aircraft systems. Displays came to life around her, showing flight parameters, navigation information, and system status data that would guide her through the challenging mission ahead. Elena's hands moved automatically across switches and controls, muscle memory, guiding actions that had once been performed under combat conditions where mistakes could prove fatal. Engine startup procedures for the F-16 required precise timing and careful monitoring of multiple systems simultaneously. Elena watched temperature and pressure readings climb toward operational parameters, while listening to the turbofan engine's characteristic whine as it spooled up to idle power. The sound triggered memories of countless military missions, reminding Elena of the responsibility and capability that came with controlling one of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. As her F-16 systems reached operational status, Elena contacted Agent Chun's team to coordinate her departure and mission parameters. The communication revealed the full scope of the crisis developing over Glacier National Park. The damaged aircraft was flying an unpredictable course through worsening weather conditions, carrying enough fuel to remain airborne for another hour before either landing or crashing. Weather reports indicated that storm conditions were intensifying faster than originally predicted, creating a rapidly closing window for any rescue attempt. Elena's mission planning drew on tactical training that emphasized rapid assessment and flexible response to changing conditions. She plotted an intercept course that would bring her into contact with the damaged F-16 in approximately 20 minutes, factoring in weather conditions and the unpredictable flight path of an aircraft. Operating under emergency automation. The plan required Elena to locate the damaged aircraft visually, since radar contact would be difficult to maintain in the severe weather conditions prevailing over the mountains. The takeoff from Elena's hidden runway represented her first official flight in 8 years, but the procedures felt as natural as if she'd been flying regularly throughout her civilian exile. The F-16 accelerated smoothly down the runway, lifting off with the effortless grace that had made the aircraft legendary among fighter pilots worldwide. As Elena climbed toward her planned intercept altitude, she felt the familiar thrill of controlling a machine capable of performance that seemed to defy natural laws. Flying through the storm system over Glacier National Park challenged every aspect of Elena's piloting skills, requiring constant attention to aircraft control while managing navigation and communication tasks simultaneously. Turbulence threw her F-16 around like a toy, while visibility dropped to near zero as she entered the cloud layers where the damaged aircraft was believed to be flying. Elena's training and experience allowed her to maintain control despite conditions that would have overwhelmed less capable pilots. The first visual contact with the damaged F-16 came as Elena broke through a cloud layer at 8,000 feet, spotting the aircraft approximately 2 miles ahead and slightly below her position. Even from a distance, Elena could see that the aircraft was in serious trouble. One engine was trailing black smoke, control surfaces were responding erratically, and the flight path showed the wandering characteristics of an aircraft barely maintaining controlled flight. Elena's approach to the damaged aircraft required extreme precision, bringing her F-16 close, enough to assess the damage while avoiding collision with an aircraft that might suddenly change direction or altitude. As she closed to within 100 yards, Elena could see the full extent of the problem. The aircraft's right engine had suffered catastrophic failure. Several control surfaces were missing or damaged, and hydraulic fluid was streaming from multiple locations along the fuselage. Communication with the damaged aircraft proved impossible, since the pilot had already ejected and the aircraft was flying under the control of emergency automation systems that weren't designed for extended operation. Elena realized that her mission had evolved from simple assessment to active intervention. She would need to somehow guide the damaged fighter to a crash site away from populated areas, or find a way to bring it down safely despite its severely compromised condition. Elena's tactical training included procedures for dealing with exactly this type of situation, but implementing those procedures under current weather conditions would test the limits of her abilities. She positioned her F-16 alongside the damaged aircraft, using her own plane's flight path to influence the direction of the emergency automation systems. By flying specific patterns relative to the damaged aircraft, Elena could trick its sensors into following her lead toward less populated areas. The damaged F-16's erratic behavior made formation flying extremely dangerous, requiring Elena to constantly adjust her position to avoid collision while maintaining the precise positioning necessary to influence its flight path. Several times, sudden movements by the damaged aircraft brought the two fighters within feet of each other, creating situations where a single mistake could have resulted in a mid-air collision that would have destroyed both planes and killed Elena instantly. Elena's navigation calculations showed that the damaged aircraft's current fuel supply would allow approximately 30 more minutes of flight time before forced landing became inevitable. She needed to guide the aircraft toward a crash site in the wilderness areas of Glacier National Park, away from the tourist facilities and populated areas that lay along its current trajectory. The challenge was accomplishing this guidance mission while flying in weather conditions that limited visibility to less than a quarter mile. As Elena worked to influence the damaged aircraft's flight path, her radio crackled with communications from Agent Chun's coordination team, who were tracking both aircraft from their ground-based command center. The team provided Elena with updated weather information, terrain data, and coordination with civilian air traffic control to ensure that other aircraft stayed clear of the emergency situation. Elena's mission had become a complex operation involving multiple agencies and requiring split-second coordination between air and ground assets. The most challenging phase of Elena's mission came when the damaged F-16's emergency automation began to fail completely, causing the aircraft to enter an uncontrolled descent toward a populated valley. Elena realized that her influence techniques were no longer sufficient to prevent a crash in an area that could result in civilian casualties. She would need to take more direct action, using her own aircraft to physically alter the damaged plane's trajectory. Elena's decision to attempt a controlled collision with the damaged aircraft represented the kind of split-second judgment that had made Phoenix legendary during her military service. By precisely timing and positioning her F-16's contact with the damaged aircraft's wing surfaces, Elena could impart enough force to change its descent angle while maintaining control of her own plane. The maneuver required timing and precision that left no margin for error. The collision occurred exactly as Elena had planned, her F-16's wingtip making contact with the damaged aircraft's tail section at precisely the right angle and velocity to alter its trajectory without causing further structural failure. The impact sent vibrations through Elena's aircraft and triggered multiple warning systems, but her F-16 remained controllable while the damaged aircraft's new flight path carried it toward an unpopulated valley deep within the national park. Elena followed the damaged F-16 during its final descent, watching as it crashed into a heavily forested area that would contain the impact and prevent the spread of fires that might threaten populated areas. The aircraft hit the ground at a steep angle, creating a debris field that was completely contained within the wilderness area. Elena's mission had succeeded. The crisis was over, civilian lives had been protected, and the classified technology aboard the damaged aircraft had been secured in a location where it could be recovered by appropriate authorities. The flight back to Clearwater required Elena to navigate through continuing storm conditions while managing damage to her own aircraft from the collision with the damaged F-16. Her plane remained flyable, but several systems were operating at reduced capability and fuel consumption had increased due to aerodynamic changes caused by minor structural damage. Elena's landing at her hidden runway was accomplished under conditions that would have challenged even experienced military pilots. As Elena shut down her F-16 systems and climbed out of the cockpit, she realized that her 8-year exile from military aviation had officially ended. Agent Chun's team would undoubtedly want to debrief her mission performance at her demonstration of capabilities that exceeded those of active-duty pilots would likely generate interest in her potential return to military service. The quiet life of Elena Martinez had been permanently disrupted by the hour she'd spent as Phoenix. The immediate aftermath of Elena's mission involved extensive coordination with federal agencies responsible for recovering the crashed aircraft and investigating the circumstances that had led to the emergency. Elena provided detailed technical information about the damaged plane's condition and behavior, helping crash investigators understand the sequence of events that had caused the emergency and guided their recovery operations. Agent Chun's debriefing revealed that Elena's mission performance had exceeded all expectations, demonstrating flying skills and tactical judgment that surpassed those of active duty pilots with current certification. The precision with which Elena had executed the collision maneuver and the successful outcome of her intervention had impressed military observers who had been monitoring the emergency from the ground. Elena's actions had prevented what could have been a catastrophic crash in a populated area. The question of Elena's future became the focus of extended discussions between Elena, Agent Chun, and senior military officials who had become aware of her successful mission. Elena's demonstration of exceptional capabilities created opportunities for return to military service, but also highlighted the value of maintaining her civilian status as a covert asset who could operate without the restrictions that limited official military personnel. Elena's decision about her future reflected the complex balance between her desire for the clear purpose and identity that military service provided and her appreciation for the independence and privacy that civilian life offered. Her experience during the emergency mission had reminded her of the satisfaction that came from using her abilities to protect others, but it had also demonstrated that she could serve national security interests while maintaining her civilian identity. The resolution Elena ultimately chose honored both aspects of her identity, while providing a framework for continued service that didn't require her to abandon the life she'd built in Clearwater. She would remain Elena Martinez, the aircraft mechanic, continuing to operate her restoration business and maintain her position in the community. However, she would also be available as Phoenix when circumstances required capabilities that exceeded those of conventional military assets. Elena's new arrangement with federal authorities provided her with official cover for her activities while ensuring that her expertise remained available for situations that demanded the highest levels of pilot skill and tactical judgment. Her hidden F-16 would be officially recognized as a civilian demonstration aircraft, providing legal justification for its presence and operation while maintaining the fiction that Elena was simply an unusually skilled civilian pilot. The integration of Elena's dual identity into an official framework required careful coordination between multiple agencies and extensive documentation that would protect both her civilian life and her covert capabilities. Elena would receive updated equipment and technical support that would maintain her aircraft at military operational standards while preserving the appearance of a civilian operation that provided cover for her true activities. Elena's relationship with the Clearwater community evolved to accommodate her enhanced status while maintaining the privacy and normalcy that had made her civilian life satisfying. Most residents remained unaware of Elena's military background or her role in resolving the recent emergency, seeing only the same competent mechanic who had served their aviation needs for 8 years. The few who suspected that Elena was more than she appeared respected her privacy while taking pride in having such an exceptional person as part of their community. The ongoing maintenance of Elena's dual identity required constant attention to security and operational procedures, but her 8 years of experience living as Elena Martinez had prepared her well for managing these challenges. She continued to operate her restoration business with the same professionalism and expertise that had established her reputation, while privately maintaining readiness for missions that might require Phoenix's unique capabilities. Elena's Sunday evening sessions with her F-16 continued, but now carried the added dimension of official mission preparation rather than simply personal connection to her authentic identity. The aircraft remained hidden from casual observation, but was now supported by resources that ensured it remained at the cutting edge of technological capability. Elena's skills were regularly tested through training exercises that maintained her proficiency while providing opportunities to develop new techniques and procedures. The long-term implications of Elena's return to active service, even in a covert capacity, included the possibility of future missions that would again test her abilities against challenges that conventional military assets couldn't handle. Elena had demonstrated that her 8 years of civilian life had enhanced rather than diminished her capabilities, creating a unique combination of technical expertise, tactical skill, and operational independence that made her an invaluable asset. For national security purposes, Elena's story had evolved from one of exile and hidden identity to one of integration and dual purpose, proving that exceptional individuals could serve their country's interests while maintaining the personal lives and community connections that provided meaning and satisfaction. Her transformation from Phoenix to Elena Martinez, and back to an integrated identity that honored both aspects of her nature, represented a resolution that satisfied her need for purpose while preserving the privacy and autonomy that had made her civilian life fulfilling. The quiet mechanic from Clearwater, Montana had reminded the world that some legends never truly disappear. They simply wait in the shadows for the moment when their unique capabilities are needed most. Elena Martinez would continue fixing broken aircraft and helping lost tourists, but Phoenix would always be ready to answer the call when impossible missions required someone willing to fly into hell and skilled enough to fly back out. 6 months after the storm that had changed everything, Elena Martinez stood in her hangar on a crisp Montana morning, watching frost patterns melt from the windows as autumn sunlight streamed through the converted aircraft facility. The familiar sounds of Clearwater awakening surrounded her. Betty Walsh starting the coffee at the diner, Frank Morrison unlocking the hardware store, and Sheriff Bradley beginning his morning patrol through town. To any observer, Elena appeared to be the same quiet mechanic who had served the community for 8 years, but beneath the surface, everything had fundamentally shifted. The integration of Elena's dual identity had required months of careful coordination between federal agencies, military oversight committees, and civilian aviation authorities. Her F-16 Fighting Falcon now carried official experimental aircraft registration that legitimized its presence while maintaining operational security protocols that protected its true capabilities. The paperwork identified Elena as a civilian test pilot conducting evaluation flights for advanced avionics systems, a cover story that explained both her exceptional skills and the sophisticated equipment housed in her facility. Elena's workshop had undergone subtle modifications that enhanced its capability while maintaining the appearance of a standard aircraft restoration business. New diagnostic equipment had been installed that could interface with both vintage propeller aircraft and modern fighter jets, providing Elena with comprehensive maintenance capabilities that exceeded those available at most military facilities. Climate control systems had been upgraded to protect sensitive electronic components, while communication equipment allowed Elena to coordinate with federal agencies without compromising operational security. The most significant change in Elena's daily routine involved regular training flights that maintained her proficiency while providing cover for her enhanced status as a covert asset. These flights were scheduled during weather conditions that minimized civilian observation, typically occurring during early morning hours when cloud cover provided natural concealment. Elena would depart from her hidden runway and conduct training exercises over remote wilderness areas, practicing maneuvers and procedures that kept her skills current with evolving military standards. Elena's relationship with Agent Chun had evolved into a professional partnership that balanced Elena's desire for independence with federal requirements for oversight and coordination. Chun served as Elena's primary contact with government agencies, providing mission briefings, technical updates, and administrative support that allowed Elena to focus on operational readiness rather than bureaucratic requirements. Their communication occurred through encrypted channels that ensured operational security, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for rapid response to emerging situations. The recovery operation for the crashed F-16 had revealed the full scope of the crisis that Elena's intervention had prevented. The damaged aircraft had been carrying prototype avionics systems worth hundreds of millions of dollars, along with classified software that could have compromised national security if it had fallen into unauthorized hands. Elena's successful mission had not only prevented civilian casualties, but had also protected military secrets that would have taken years to develop and replace. Elena's mission performance had generated interest from senior military officials, who recognized that her unique combination of civilian status and exceptional capabilities created opportunities for operations that conventional military assets couldn't accomplish. Her ability to operate without the restrictions that limited official military personnel made her valuable for situations requiring plausible deniability or civilian cover. Elena had become what intelligence professionals call the gray asset, someone who could serve national security interests while maintaining complete separation from official military structures. The training regimen Elena followed to maintain her readiness incorporated lessons learned from her emergency mission over Glacier National Park. She practiced formation flying with damaged aircraft using computer simulations that recreated the conditions she had faced during the crisis. These simulations allowed Elena to refine her techniques for influencing automated flight systems, while developing new procedures for handling aircraft emergencies in severe weather conditions. Elena's technical expertise had expanded to include systems and procedures that went beyond traditional fighter pilot training. She studied crash investigation techniques, emergency response protocols, and civilian aviation regulations that might affect her ability to operate in crisis situations. This broader knowledge base ensured that Elena could adapt to various scenarios while maintaining the civilian credentials that provided cover for her activities. The modifications Elena had made to her F-16 reflected both her enhanced official status and the lessons learned from her recent mission. Improved weather radar systems provided better capability for operating in severe atmospheric conditions, while enhanced communication equipment allowed real-time coordination with multiple agencies during complex operations. The aircraft's defensive systems had been upgraded with countermeasures that could defeat more sophisticated threats, ensuring Elena's survival during missions that might involve hostile opposition. Elena's cover story as a civilian demonstration pilot had proven remarkably effective at explaining her capabilities while maintaining operational security. Local aviation enthusiasts had accepted that Elena's exceptional skills resulted from extensive experience with vintage military aircraft, while her occasional high-performance flights were attributed to airshow preparation and equipment testing. The story provided logical explanations for activities that might otherwise have raised questions about Elena's true background and capabilities. The psychological adjustment to Elena's new status had been less challenging than she had anticipated, largely because the integration honored both aspects of her identity rather than forcing her to choose between them. Elena Martinez continued to provide aircraft restoration services and community support that had made her a valued member of Clearwater society, while Phoenix remained available for missions that required capabilities beyond those of conventional military assets. The balance between these identities felt natural and sustainable rather than conflicted or compartmentalized. Elena's relationship with Jamie Parker had evolved to include more advanced training in aircraft systems and maintenance procedures, reflecting Elena's enhanced status while providing valuable skills development for the young man. Jamie had proven trustworthy and capable, earning increased responsibility for routine maintenance tasks while demonstrating the discretion necessary for working around sensitive equipment. Elena found satisfaction in mentoring someone whose enthusiasm for aviation reminded her of her own early passion for flight. The economic impact of Elena's enhanced status had been managed through careful coordination with federal agencies that ensured her civilian business remained financially viable, while providing additional resources for maintaining her operational readiness. Government contracts for specialized technical services provided steady income that supported both her public restoration work and her covert activities, creating a sustainable financial foundation that eliminated concerns about maintaining her dual identity over extended periods. Elena's integration into the broader intelligence community had introduced her to other assets who operated under similar arrangements, civilian specialists whose unique capabilities made them valuable for situations requiring non-military solutions. These relationships provided Elena with professional networks and support systems that enhanced her effectiveness while reducing the isolation that might otherwise have compromised her psychological well-being. The security protocols Elena followed to protect her enhanced status were more sophisticated than those she had developed during her years of complete concealment, but they were also more sustainable because they had official support rather than relying entirely on her personal resources. Electronic surveillance systems protected her facility from unauthorized access while providing early warning about potential security threats. Communication security protocols ensured that her coordination with government agencies couldn't be intercepted or compromised by hostile intelligence services. Elena's contribution to pilot training programs had become an unofficial but valuable component of her service, with her mission reports and tactical innovations being incorporated into curricula for elite military aviation units. Her successful techniques for managing aircraft emergencies in severe weather conditions were being taught to pilots throughout the military, potentially saving lives in future crisis situations. Elena took satisfaction in knowing that her expertise was benefiting other aviators, even when she couldn't receive public recognition for her contributions. The community impact of Elena's enhanced status had been minimal, largely because most residents remained unaware of the true scope of her capabilities and responsibilities. Elena continued to participate in local events, support community organizations, and maintain the relationships that had made Clearwater feel like home during her 8 years of exile. The continuity of her civilian life provided stability and normalcy that balanced the demands of her covert responsibilities. Elena's Sunday evening sessions with her F-16 had evolved to include mission planning exercises and tactical simulations that kept her prepared for various scenarios that might require her intervention. These sessions now served multiple purposes: maintaining aircraft readiness, preserving pilot proficiency, and developing new procedures that enhanced her capability to respond to emerging threats. The ritual remained emotionally significant, while gaining practical importance for Elena's operational readiness. The technological upgrades Elena's facility had received included manufacturing capabilities that allowed her to produce specialized components for both her F-16 and other aircraft that might require her support. These capabilities reduced dependence on external suppliers while providing Elena with the flexibility to modify equipment for specific mission requirements. The upgrades enhanced Elena's self-sufficiency while maintaining the appearance of a civilian facility focused on aircraft restoration. Elena's coordination with civilian aviation authorities had been carefully managed to ensure that her activities remained within legal boundaries while providing necessary flexibility for emergency response situations. Her experimental aircraft registration included provisions for rapid deployment during crisis situations, allowing Elena to respond immediately to threats without waiting for bureaucratic approvals that might delay critical interventions. The intelligence briefings Elena received kept her informed about potential threats and situations that might require her intervention, allowing her to maintain appropriate readiness levels while avoiding unnecessary stress about hypothetical scenarios. These briefings provided Elena with strategic context for her role while respecting her civilian status and desire for normal life when not actively engaged in operations. Elena's relationship with her military past had been reconciled through her new arrangement, which acknowledged her service and expertise while providing a framework for continued contribution that didn't require her to sacrifice the independence and community connections that had made her civilian life meaningful. The resolution honored both her identity as Phoenix and her chosen life as Elena Martinez, creating integration rather than conflict between these aspects of her nature. The long-term implications of Elena's arrangement included the possibility of training other civilians who possessed exceptional capabilities that could serve national security interests while maintaining non-military status. Elena's successful integration provided a model for developing assets who could operate with greater flexibility than conventional military personnel while maintaining the patriotic commitment necessary for protecting American interests. Elena's story had become an example of how exceptional individuals could serve their country's needs while maintaining personal autonomy and community relationships that provided meaning and satisfaction beyond professional achievement. Her transformation from exile to integration demonstrated that service could take forms that honored both individual identity and collective responsibility, creating solutions that benefited everyone involved. The morning routine Elena followed 6 months after her return to active service reflected the successful balance she had achieved between her dual identities. She would begin each day with equipment checks that ensured both her F-16 and her civilian aircraft remained in perfect condition, followed by review of weather conditions and potential flight opportunities. The routine provided structure and purpose while maintaining the flexibility necessary for responding to unexpected situations. Elena's future remained deliberately undefined, with sufficient flexibility to accommodate whatever challenges might arise, while maintaining the stability and community connections that had made her civilian life fulfilling. She had proven that legends could return from exile stronger and more capable than before, demonstrating that some stories never truly end but simply evolve into new chapters that honor both past achievements and future possibilities. The quiet mechanic from Clearwater, Montana had successfully transformed from hidden exile to integrated asset, proving that exceptional individuals could serve multiple purposes simultaneously while maintaining the authenticity and independence that defined their character. Elena Martinez would continue fixing aircraft and supporting her community, while Phoenix remained ready to answer calls that required someone willing to attempt the impossible and skilled enough to succeed. As Elena prepared for another day that might include routine maintenance work or emergency missions requiring split-second decisions in life or death situations, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from military service through civilian exile to integrated identity. The path had been challenging and often lonely, but it had ultimately led to a resolution that honored all aspects of her nature while providing opportunities for continued service that protected others and utilized her unique capabilities. The sound of approaching aircraft drew Elena's attention to the eastern sky, where a formation of military jets was conducting training exercises over the wilderness areas beyond Clearwater. Elena watched their precise formations and professional execution with the appreciation of someone who understood the skill and dedication required for such operations. The pilots were undoubtedly competent and well-trained, but Elena knew that when conventional capabilities proved insufficient, when conditions exceeded normal parameters and outcomes seemed impossible, Phoenix would be ready to bridge the gap between what others could accomplish and what circumstances demanded. Elena Martinez returned to her morning routine, checking fluids in a vintage Mustang engine while listening to radio chatter that kept her informed about aviation activities throughout the region. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency across familiar tasks while her mind remained alert for any indication that her unique capabilities might be needed. The integration of her dual identity had created a life that satisfied both her need for normalcy and her commitment to service, proving that some people could successfully inhabit multiple worlds simultaneously. The legend of Phoenix lived on, Not in classified files or official records, but in the readiness of someone who refused to let exceptional capabilities remain unused when others needed protection. Elena's story continued to evolve, writing new chapters that honored both her past achievements and her chosen future, demonstrating that the best legends never truly end, but simply find new ways to serve the causes they value most highly. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.